1 week after 9/11, an FBI special agent interviews a prisoner in a New York City jail.
I walked in and I sat down with him and I said, well, tell me how they did it.
Immediately after the terrorist attacks, authorities placed the prisoner in 24-hour lockdown. For a week, he's been in total isolation, with no access to TV, radio, or newspapers.
What he laid out was the attack as if he knew every detail of it. This is how you position yourself. I taught people how to sit in first class. I told you about utility knives. It was just kind of eerie.
The prisoner is this man.
My name is Ali Mohamed.
He was Osama bin Laden's spy in America. He worked for and betrayed 3 arms of the U.S. government: the CIA, the U.S. Army, and the FBI. An extraordinary triple cross. He paved the way for Al-Qaeda in the United States.
Hello everyone, that was an excerpt from the documentary Triple Cross, all about the subject of today's interview, Ali Mohamed. Now, so far in the series, we've talked about the United States arming and training the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and Central Asian theatres. We've talked about the assassination of Jewish radical Maya Kahani. We've talked about the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, the Landmarks plot, and the bombings of the embassies in East Africa. But we haven't said much about a figure that's central to all these events, Ali Mohamed. And the reason we haven't is that there's so much to say. Ali really deserved an episode all to himself. He's the double or triple agent who worked for Al-Qaeda, the US military, the CIA, the FBI, and maybe Egyptian intelligence too, and is perhaps the key figure in understanding the state's working relationship with terrorists. Now here's Adam Fitzgerald starting with some information on Ali's background leading up to the relevant events.
Ali Mohamed is a very interesting figure in his own right. And, well, he was born in Egypt in 1952. His family were well-educated people. His father enlisted in the Egyptian military. Ali was raised a devout Muslim at home, following in his father's footsteps. He enlisted in the Pharaoh Military Academy. And after his graduation from high school in 1970, he continued to excel in his studies and obtained a bachelor's in psychology while learning to speak English, Hebrew, and French. And he also joined the Egyptian army in 1981. And he stood at this position there for the next 10 years. Ali Mohamed was taking part in a program for foreign officers at the U.S. Army Special Forces School in North Carolina during the fall of 1981. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was assassinated by Islamic radicals from Gamma Islamiyah, and in 1984, Mohamed was forced to resign his status within the Egyptian army for being too radical in his beliefs. It was also here he approaches a CIA station located in Cairo to become a spy. After some formalities with the agency accepts his offer, and immediately he travels to Germany where he makes contact with agents in Hezbollah, and the Hezbollah branch there. Meanwhile, he tells the Hezbollah branch that he's working with the CIA unequivocally and irresponsibly in my book. But meanwhile, the CIA states that Mohamed tells Hezbollah that he's a CIA spy and stops to attack. Later found out that that's not to be the case, and there's going to be some contradictory claims by the CIA allowing Mohamed to abscond from the CIA itself, and they cease operations with him. But there's contradictory statements that he still continues to be a spy for them.
Okay, let's just clarify that, because this is like the first really thing that sticks out to me about the story, that, okay, he's recruited by the CIA and he's a military officer, okay? So it would seem like the most amateurish mistake you could make in the world would be to announce that. So his motivation for announcing is that he's a double agent because he's really an Islamic radical. So he's trying to play the CIA. He walks in and he says, hey, I'm really of the CIA. But of course, you're going to assume that you're not necessarily the only agent they have in that organization at that place, right? So it's a story that the first part of many things that don't really make sense, okay? And then leading on from that, he's still able to get in. There might be some more you want to say before you come to this, but when the CIA ostensibly terminate their relationship with him, he is then still able to travel to the United States.
That's correct. He actually applies for a U.S. visa and he gets it. And not just a U.S. visa, but a multi-entry visa to travel freely inside and outside the United States. And you would think that with the CIA actually knowing this information, that they would put him on a watch list, a terrorist watch list, knowing that he's actually someone who is quite dangerous and has contacts with militant agencies such as Al-Jihad in Egypt and Gamma Islamiyah as well. And actually, he actually also has contacts with Hezbollah, not just in Egypt, but also in Lebanon as well. And you would think that the CIA actually put him on a watch list not from entering the United States. Not so. And like I said, there were contradictory statements within that agency in Cairo that they didn't stop operations with Mohammed, but they actually let him conduct operations in the United States. And I'll get to that because in 1986, in 1984, he entered the United States, and in 86, Ali Mohammed enlists in the U.S. Army in North Carolina, where he works as a supply sergeant for the Green Beret unit. He actually is in the Green Berets in less than a year, which is miraculous in its own right. But he's actually well fit. He's actually intelligent, and he's a drill sergeant at Fort Bragg. And meanwhile, he's hired to teach courses on Arabic culture at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School in Greensboro, North Carolina. And it was around at this very same time, Ali Mohammed takes part in a video series called Middle East Focus Series. Mohammed would have discussions with individuals in the military about how Islam, without political affiliations, cannot survive. So in the series, Mohammed fields questions from American officers and doesn't hold back in his statements regarding his disposition toward Israel and how Americans are generally regarded as ignorant to Arab affairs.
Yeah, it's fascinating videos to watch. I'll link to them below if anyone wanting to see those clips. It's a couple of things I pick up on that. One, it's not really clear to me what's going on in those videos. Like the narrative put forward is that this is Ali Mohammed sat there with the Green Berets expressing his true beliefs about how there can be no spiritual Islam without a political Islam, and Islam must come to dominate, and speaking very much like the radical Muslim fanatic. Okay, and it's not clear from watching them if this is his truly held belief or if he's doing this as a kind of role play exercise. So the narrative we're giving is this is truly held belief, right? But there's maybe other factors that contradict that in his life. And I think another point that's probably worth mentioning, because it speaks to the nature of the man, is how he met his wife, right? In that he met her just on the plane going over to the United States. It sort of speaks to a certain charisma and charm to be able to form a deep enough connection with someone that you would then get married to them afterwards, you know?
Yeah, correct. It's actually so I'm glad you brought that up about his wife. But yeah, I mean, it goes to show you that this guy is not just a seemingly effective manipulator. He's also someone who's conducting mental warfare operations as well. Like you said before, how do we know his true, genuine intentions? He could be giving off this radical fundamentalist persona while conducting this persona in regards to the Central Intelligence Agency itself, trying to portray this radical inside the United States, inside the military-industrial complex. But he gives off this aura as well. But I mean, also that it goes back to your point about regarding why he would go to Hezbollah and admit that he's a Central Intelligence agent right away, almost seemingly right away, knowing that that group had to have agents within their own right going back to such and telling what happened. And that's exactly what happened. So it's very foolhardy, but maybe he did that on purpose. I don't know. But that in itself is the most important aspect, that we don't definitively know the true motivations of the CIA and of Ali Mohammed.
Okay,
and that's why.
And that continues, right? Because he's there's a period where he goes off to Afghanistan to train the Mujahideen, ostensibly just off his own back. It's like his summer vacation is going and doing that. It doesn't seem to land him in too much trouble. Do you maybe want, but that's all also congruent with the CIA's policy at the time, right? So, do you want to maybe speak to that?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because it was at this time that Lieutenant Colonel Robert Anderson, who is Ali Mohammed's commanding officer, he detailed a report to the Army intelligence about Mohammed's radical beliefs and wished for them to investigate the matter, but his reports were ignored and dismissed. And that's when Anderson realized that Mohammed was not just a special forces officer, but he was protected by the Central Intelligence Agency. But Anderson even thought it was ludicrous that an officer would take part in a foreign war in Afghanistan, because that's where Mohammed took part in 1988-89, because he flew over there, and when he came back to the United States, he wasn't expunged or he wasn't punished for that, because no officer in his own right would go to Afghanistan and participate with the Mujahideen and then come back without any reparations in his own right.
Yeah, I had no fear of talking about it to his commanding officer.
Exactly right. And when he knew that he wasn't being punished for his own right, and still within the Green Berets, he knew right away that he was part of the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, meanwhile, his neighbors back home, because he owned a home in Santa Clara, California, as well as in North Carolina. Meanwhile, this guy, I'll bring up in the future, this guy's going to have a lot of homes in a lot of places, but his neighbors back home in Santa Clara, California, knew Ali Mohammed was working for the intelligence service, because Mohammed was telling friends back home he worked for the CIA and that he hoped to do so in the future again. He also connects with a person named Khalid Abdul al-Wahhab, who is an Egyptian medical student in Islamic Jihad. Now, he's in Egypt at the time, but Dahab moves to the United States at Ali Mohammed's insistence. And both men traveled to Afghanistan in 1990. And at his back and forth travels, Mohammed would find time to visit also the Al-Qifa Mosque in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah. And here he would give firearms training and military training to members of the al-Rahman cell.
Yes, yeah, so just to remind the audience, the big things we've talked about so far, if you go back for the series, the assassination of Maya Kahani. I think I said that wrong before. I think I said the assassination of al-Sayed Nasser. He was the assassin. Okay. The World Trade Center bombing, the landmarks plot to blow up various sites in New York, and the embassy bombings. Ali Mohammed has been in and around all of these, right? So, and they're all centered around this Al-Qifa Center in Brooklyn, New York, and Ali Mohammed has been involved in all of them. So maybe start, if you want to start there, Adam, and talk through what his involvement was in I think, mostly training the people who carried out these acts.
Well, yes, he was actually training like the people of the Omar al-Rahman cell, called the Brooklyn cell. And meanwhile, Rahman also entered the United States in 1990 while being on a terrorist watch list. And then Rahman was approved for his U.S. visa in the U.S. Embassy in Egypt, and that disapproval for the visa was under the auspices of the Central Intelligence Agency.
It was Frank Wisner's son, the famous CIA guy, Frank Wisner. His son approved Rahman's visa, but he was the blind sheikh, right? That's what we made the point in an earlier video, that radical Islam came to the United States at the invitation of the CIA.
Right. Now, to go back to your point, but the Brooklyn office branch, which is located which is the Al-Qifa Mosque, is the Maktab al-Khidmat, which in Arabic, translated from the Arabic, is called Afghan Services Bureau. And it's called Al-Farouk, which was a business center for this service center located at the Al-Qifa Mosque itself in Brooklyn. It was covertly funded by the Central Intelligence Agency. And Mohammed would also rent a place in New York, also while renting homes in California. Now, Mohammed stayed at the home of El Sayed Nasser as well. And according to a New York Times report in 1990, Ali Mohammed is honorably discharged from the U.S. Army with commendations in his file, including one for patriotism, valor, fidelity, and professional excellence. However, he remains in the U.S. Army Reserves for the next 5 years. And at around the fall of 1990, Mohammed also becomes an FBI informant in the San Francisco field office. Also at this time, we see the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane, a radical Jewish fundamentalist from the JTF, the Jewish Task Force, by El Said Nosser, the same individual who shared the home of Ali Mohammed, and who also trained Ali Mohammed in tactical warfare.
Ali Mohammed trained El Said Nosser in tactical.
That's correct. Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
This is one of the really interesting things of when the New York police force raided El Said Nosser's house after the assassination. They found a lot of documents in Arabic, which they claimed they couldn't translate. The FBI couldn't translate them. But they also found Fort Bragg training manuals. Right now, you think anything was going to have a red light there? It'd be how did this guy get U.S. Special Forces training manuals?
I'm going to detail that further with you. When the agents from the FBI New York field office and the NYPD raided the home of Nosser, not did they just find military documents for Fort Bragg, but they also found ammunition, maps of the city with circular marks around the highlighted areas of Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn. They also found, like you said, Arabic documents, bomb-making formulas, details of an Islamic militant cell, and mentions the name Al-Qaeda for the first time that we see. Also, detailed and top-secret plans for Operation Bright Star, which was a special operations training exercise simulating an attack in Baluchistan, where who grew up? Ramzi Youssef, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a part of Pakistan between Afghanistan and the Arabian Sea, videotape talks of Ali Mohammed delivered at Fort Bragg, which you'll link in the video below. Much of this incriminating and damning evidence of Ali Mohammed. Now, what do? The FBI, however, decides to act that this assassination was a part of a lone gunman theory, just El Said Nosser, and did not investigate the matters and what it should have been, which was a larger radical extremist group which had nefarious plans for New York City in itself.
Sure, and I think it's worth mentioning the reason given, as I understand it, is there's the perception that if you go after a large conspiracy, you might lose the conviction of the person you know is guilty, right? So it's the same thing that was the FBI said about Timothy McVeigh after the Oklahoma City bombing, why they didn't look for the larger group he was involved with, which everyone knows existed, involved in the bombing, in looking for a large conspiracy, proportioning blame might become more ambiguous, and they lose the conviction of El Said Nosser in this case, and that there was no perception of this wide Islamic terrorist threat, so there wasn't this sense of urgency around translating the Arabic in the documents there.
Correct, and I think this was brought up, and I hate to use him, but Steve Emerson in a documentary he did way back, and he brought up the fact that they didn't necessarily translate the documents because there was no pertinent information. But if we didn't translate the documents, how would you know that? I think the FBI probably did, but they just whitewashed the issue. And in the book called 1,000 Years for Revenge, written by Peter Lance, he actually brings up the fact that the FBI was actually inequipped to deal with a larger conspiracy because they only had like 2 agents, and that was John Antisev and Mike Napoli working in the counterterrorism task force. So now were they just ill-equipped? Also, too, that they probably didn't want to admit that there was a bigger, larger conspiracy regarding this radical fundamentalist group, and that they probably knew that there was a bigger group, but they just decided to say that when I'll bring it up later, when they arrested Landmark's plot, that they finished with the group and they said there wouldn't be any more. And I think they actually believed that. But I'll continue with Ali Mohammed. In 1981, Mohammed travels to Sudan and meets with Osama bin Laden, who has moved there under pressure from the kingdom's monarchy in Saudi Arabia. Here, he's met with reverence, and actually bin Laden tells him to go and locate and find American and Israeli targets abroad and try to photograph and potential targets of a bombing attack. But in 1992, Mohammed travels to Bosnia and he trains Mujahideen fighters there. But he uses the alias Abu Abdallah. And he's part of a 14-man Al-Qaeda team made up of retired U.S. military personnel that enters Bosnia through Croatia to train and arm Mujahideen fighters.
Okay, and as we talked about in the episode on the breakup of Yugoslavia, that will be entirely consistent with US policy in Bosnia to support the Islamic factions.
That's correct. And according to an Associated Press report, the 14-man team was smuggled into Bosnia one by one in December of '92. The team is said to have sponsored by a mosque in Newark, New Jersey. Now, when he returns to meet with bin Laden in '93, bin Laden is impressed and asks Ali Mohammed to set up an al-Qaeda cell in Nairobi, Kenya, to support al-Qaeda operations against U.S. intervention in the neighboring country of Somalia that same year. And in February 1993, the World Trade Center North Tower is bombed. And the Wall Street Journal reports that investigators went back to Nusayra's personal possessions and they finally saw a link to one Ali Mohammed. Top secret U.S. military documents, obviously supplied by Mohammed, are found in Nusayra's possessions. Still, no action is taken against Ali Mohammed. Meanwhile, in the spring, now go ahead, you were going to say something.
Well, you might be about to bring this up actually, but I think that what jumped off page at me is after that, Ali Mohammed is able to re-enter the country. The FBI are aware that he's doing so, and he's not picked up. I think he crosses over the Canadian border into the US.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up in just a bit. Also, no, that's all right. But in the spring of '93, Mohammed helps this is important though. Ali Mohammed helps Ayman al-Zawahiri enter the United States for fundraising tours, and even acts as head of his security during his stay. Now, this is before anyone knew who Ayman al-Zawahiri was, and this is apparently his second visit to the United States, having previously paid a recruiting visit to the Al-Kifa Refugee Center in Brooklyn in 1989.
Okay.
Now, John Zent, who is Ali Mohammed's FBI handler from San Francisco, finally decides to interview Ali Mohammed with Army intelligence investigators because the pressure was on. There's a lot of incriminating evidence that Ali Mohammed's training individuals abroad. And of course, the FBI investigation with Al Said Nusayr. Mohammed remarkably tells the investigators that Osama bin Laden is planning to build an army of Mujahideen fighters to attack the Saudi kingdom for their insolence in allowing American military to station there. Early in the year, FBI investigators discovered that Mohammed stole many top secret military documents and gave them to Islamic militants here and abroad. No action was taken to Ali Mohammed, which was shocking to many people in the intelligence community at this point. However, Mohammed faced no trouble from the Defense Department about this. Now, this would be a consistent course of action, which many in the FBI began to question if Mali was being protected by the Central Intelligence Agency. In December of '93, Mohammed is detained by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police after attempting to meet with a known professional counterfeiter named Essa Marzouk. Mohammed admits that he traveled to Vancouver to help Marzouk to sneak into the United States and admits working closely with Osama bin Laden. This is astounding information. Mohammed then tells the Canadian officials to call John Zent, his handler at the FBI. Zent confirms that Mohammed does work for the FBI as a confidential informant and asks them to release him. Miraculously, they do. Meanwhile, the FBI took part in a raid in a warehouse in Queens when FBI informant Imad Salem took part in monitoring members of the Al-Qaeda Hamas dubbed the Landmarks Plot. And the FBI arrests numerous individuals, including Omar Abdel Rahman. In 1994, Mohammed Attaf, the Al-Qaeda military commander, is actually suspicious about Ali Mohammed and believes he's working with American intelligence services. It was around this time that U.S. investigators from the FBI finally begin monitoring Ali Mohammed. And the FBI agents traced phone calls from Mohammed's California residence in Santa Clara and link him to bin Laden's satellite phone and to bin Laden associates in Nairobi, Kenya as well. In late 1994, agents discovered that Mohammed is temporarily living in an Al-Qaeda safe house also in Nairobi, as well as here in the United States, in New York and in California. In the winter of 1994, Mohammed returns to the United States, and on December 9th, he's interviewed by an FBI agent named Harlan Bell and Assistant U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy, who was one of the prosecutors. for the upcoming Landmarks plot trial. Later, during the first weeks of December, Mohamed is subpoenaed to testify in the trial. But when the trial starts on January 3rd of 1995, Mohamed cannot be found, and he never responds to the subpoena. It's alleged that McCarthy told him to ignore a subpoena and not to testify for reasons unknown. I don't know why. But meanwhile, Mohamed has scouted potential targets for bin Laden in Africa, taking photographs of U.S. embassies, highly populated areas in downtown, in Morocco, Libya, and East Africa. In February of 95, the U.S. government files a confidential court document listing bin Laden and scores of other people as possible co-conspirators in the New York City Landmarks plot. One of them was Ali Mohamed. He was on that list, and which was confirming to investigators that they were aware that Al-Qaeda was probably behind this plot. In 1996, FBI agent Jack Clunan, who was part of the I-49 task force team, which was a team made up of prosecutors and investigators which are focusing on bin Laden, began ramping up their investigations into Ali Mohamed. And around this time as well, they began bugging the home of Ali Mohamed's Santa Clara home in California. Meanwhile, Jack Clunan, Patrick Fitzgerald, and FBI agent Harlan Bell take Ali Mohamed out for dinner to a restaurant in Sacramento. The purpose of this meet was the hopes of finally having Mohamed become a cooperating agent for them, and to finally insinuate what they knew all along was that he was part of a radical Islamic group called Al-Qaeda. And meanwhile, Mohamed has reiterated many of the following statements profoundly in front of all men. One, that he organized bin Laden's move from Afghanistan to Sudan in 1991, that he admired bin Laden, that he asserted that he doesn't need a religious edict to make war on the United States, since it was obvious the United States is the enemy, and that jihad against America can be waged at any time, that they are an enemy to an Islam worldwide. After dinner, Clooney will recall that Patrick Fitzgerald turned to him and said, "This is the most dangerous man, quote unquote, this is the most dangerous man I've ever met in my life. We cannot let this man out on the street," end quote. But Peter Lance, author, will later note that, quote, "But that's exactly what he did. Patrick Fitzgerald allowed Ali Mohamed, after making all those incriminating statements in front of him, to go free," end quote. Even though, at the end, Ali Mohamed firmly rejected the offer to cooperate. In 1997, the FBI office in San Francisco began monitoring Ali Mohamed's computer in his home. However, journalist Peter Lance believes that, given Mohamed's apparent foreknowledge of the embassy bombings, which come later, the computer probably contained references to that operation. And in his book, Triple Cross, he asked, quote, "If U.S. agents had access to Mohamed's phone and hard drives, why didn't they come to understanding his role as a key player in the embassy bombing plot? If their motive was to lie in wait to monitor his phone and email traffic, why didn't they surveillance put them right in the middle of the embassy plot," end quote. Warnings would go up all about the U.S. embassies in East Africa in 1998, in the beginning of 1998. However, these warnings will go unheeded because on August 7th, 1998, two U.S. embassy bombings are bombed. One in Nairobi, the other in Kenya. The bombings killed 213 people.
Kenya and Tanzania, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kenya and Tanzania. Thank you for the correction. The bombings killed 213 people and injured more than 4,500. 2 days after the U.S. embassy bombings in Africa, the FBI interviewed Ali Mohamed over the phone. He says Al-Qaeda is behind the bombings, but he doesn't know who the perpetrators are, and he won't give out their names, even though he knows exactly who the perpetrators are. He lies to them. On August 24th, a team of federal agents secretly searched Mohamed's apartment in California. His computer's already bugged, and they know what's going on there. But they take out the floppy disks, and they finally retrieve the hard drives. They also copied the CD-ROMs and the floppy disks and photocopy documents in his home. Finally, on September 10th of 98, Ali Mohamed is secretly arrested. His arrest came while he was leaving a grand jury hearing, and Patrick Fitzgerald was on the prosecuting team that subpoenaed Mohammed to appear. According to Fitzgerald, quote, Ali Mohammed lied in that grand jury proceeding and left the courthouse to go to his hotel, followed by FBI agents, but not under arrest. He had imminent plans to fly to Egypt immediately after the grand jury. It was believed at that time that Mohammed lied and that he was involved with the Al-Qaeda network, but Mohammed had not by then been tied to the embassy bombings. The decision had been made at that moment whether to charge Mohammed with false statements. If not, Mohammed would leave the country. That difficult decision had to be made without knowing or reviewing the intelligence information on the other side of the wall. It was ultimately decided to arrest Mohammed that night in his hotel room after, end quote. In May of '99, U.S. investigators, along with the FBI, had finally come to a formal agreement with Ali Mohammed after 8 months of intense negotiations with his lawyers. Prosecutors have been attempting to get Mohammed to cooperate and tell all that he knew about Al-Qaeda in return for a lighter sentence. Ali Mohammed pled guilty to 5 counts of conspiracy to kill nationals of the United States in connection with the 1998 embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. The San Francisco Chronicle similarly notes shortly after 9/11 that Mohammed has never been sentenced and that defense lawyers and security experts believed he had begun giving evidence about bin Laden to the government in hopes of winning release from prison. To this day, no one from the FBI or the CIA, whether they're talking or not, are aware of Ali Mohammed's whereabouts. And I think that they do know, they're just not talking. And that most within the FBI blame the Central Intelligence Agency of Mohammed's clandestine activities as far back as 1989. The CIA has not mentioned anything about Mohammed's contacts with their offices in Germany or in the United States. And Mohammed's current whereabouts are still not known publicly. He also has not been formally sentenced for his role in the embassy bombings and most likely never will.
Okay, is there any precedence for that, Adam? Because like other major figures in terror, we do know the whereabouts, like Terry Nichols' whereabouts of the Oklahoma City is known, Ramzi Youssef, you know the prisons these people are at even, right? Sheikh El-Modo Rahman is dead now, but he was, the whereabouts were known. They were sentenced and their whereabouts were known, right? I don't know if there's any precedent for even people who were never put on trial. You know, they're at Guantanamo Bay or maybe the black site around the world or something, but they're not put on trial. Is there any precedence for someone who confesses certain charges, isn't sentenced, goes to jail, but the whereabouts are completely unknown?
Actually, this is the first time I've heard of any type of individual in organized crime or terrorist-related crime that has given prima facie evidence of his own complicity in the attacks and has never been sentenced. I think the one glaring reason is that the intelligence agencies like I think basically the Central Intelligence, not just the FBI, but the CIA as well, didn't want egg on their face, so to speak, because he was actually working or playing all the agencies involved. And it was the Central Intelligence Agency who had given him his U.S. visa. It was the FBI who knew about Ali Mohammed being a terrorist, but allowing him to roam inside the United States, and not just roam, but also being part of special forces in the military-industrial complex as well. So here's a guy who's not just playing the Central Intelligence Agency, but the FBI, the Pentagon, and being a part of known terrorist networks like Al-Jihad and Jamaat Islamiyah, as well as having ties to Osama bin Laden himself.
Can you give a sense of Ali's importance to these groups? Okay, like, is he one of several dozen people who are doing a similar job in them, or even several hundred people, or does his skill set from the US Special Forces and Egyptian military mean that he's really valuable for those reasons in terms of spotting bomb sites at embassies and training up Al-Qaeda militants? Do you have a sense of his value to these organizations?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think he was of utmost importance. I think he's actually probably one of the very few people in the world who can actually give tactical guerrilla training, not to just subjects at the military academy in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the Green Berets, but also he was training Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan, Bosnia, and Croatia. Here's a guy, and also in Somalia as well. His level of intelligence and his level of expertise in both fields is really rare, because there hasn't been an individual in Al-Qaeda, so to speak. I'll just deal with them. Maybe Abu Zubaydah, maybe, but not to the level that Ali Mohammed did. Ali Mohammed was giving not just tactical training, but also operational training, planning, operational planning. Here's a guy who could draw blueprints on the deal. He actually knew where specific spots in the U.S. embassies to bomb. Also, tactical training to how to assassinate people.
And hijackings too, right?
Right, hijacking as well. Right, because he was actually giving tactical training to Algerian Mujahideen fighters in Algeria as well, who were involved in the France 89 hijacking.
Was that the one with the plan to crash a plane into the Eiffel Tower?
Right. I was remiss in not bringing that up, and it was just a small story. But yeah, he actually was training the AIG in Algeria as well for hijackings. So here's a guy who has remarkable in-depth intelligence, not just in the guerrilla tactics, but also into operational tactics as well.
Am I right in also saying that he was involved in the training of the guys in Black Hawk Down, the shoot down of the American helicopter in Somalia? Because there's a particular way to take a helicopter down where you have to fire the rocket propelled grenade at the tail fin, and then the ensuing shootout. He was a trainer of those guys directly, wasn't he?
He actually trained the guerrillas under the leadership of Mohamed Farah Aidid, who had the largest guerrilla operations in Somalia. And he actually trained the soldiers in how to use rocket-propelled grenades and how to shoot them at helicopters, aiming, as you pointed out, in the tail section so they could be downed. And the reason why he didn't want to explode them was so that they could capture the soldiers and hold them for ransom, and to hold them and to extract information for them. Because he didn't want to just kill them. He actually wanted them to extract information from them as well. And that's expert training. And that would not be known to like Al-Qaeda subjects or Assahab subjects and other Mogadishu operatives who are just dumb, just grunts. Ali Mohammed was well above that mentally. He was an expert in that field. He wanted to extract information from the soldiers, and that's why he wanted to shoot there. He wanted to shoot at the helicopter's propellers, so that the helicopter, not just that they could extract information for the soldiers, but also gain information for what kind of helicopters these actually they were using. The logistical operations of the helicopters themselves, the technical aspects as well. It's ingenious what he was teaching them, actually.
Okay, so it seems to me there's a couple of ways of viewing this story, right? One is you have this idea from Ali Mohammed being a triple agent, right? And this is the perspective put forth in Peter Lance's books, which I think are brilliant, right? They're like 1,000 Years of Revenge, on my favorite books on the whole 9/11 issue, I think, to gain a great understanding. And Peter Lance, to read him or to hear him interviewed, has this kind of anger and indignation at the intelligence agencies for the years prior to 9/11 in allowing figures like Ali Mohammed in particular and Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman into the country, and to, effectively they were protecting them. But he sees it as a kind of like intelligence error, that ultimately the CIA were outthought and outmaneuvered by this crafty fox, Ali Mohammed, and he was secretly working for Al-Qaeda all the way along. And this is a cock-up, basically. And then you have like the other perspective, and maybe people like Sibel Edmonds, the FBI whistleblower, would speak about it this way, of like Ali being his ultimate loyal, well, whatever his ultimate loyalty was, him being much more closely a tool of the CIA, where in this perspective, crossing the line and saying that he didn't go rogue. He was carrying out the wishes of his handlers in like training these bombers and with the assassinations, and particularly with the bombings of the U.S. embassy. That Ali was acting as an agent carrying out the goals of U.S. foreign policy in these areas. It kind of like a comparable to a Lee Harvey Oswald figure, say. So, like, I wouldn't know which one of those is true, to be honest. But I could certainly see both perspectives on it. What are your thoughts on how to understand what Ali Mohammed's ultimate motivations are?
Well, I would agree with you. I think that he did try and play the Central Intelligence Agency, but they allowed him to make such egregious actions in their name, in the hopes of him carrying out their long-perceived plans for foreign policy in the region. And that was to have these mujahideen groups located in Croatia, Algeria, Afghanistan, properly trained and funded from these agencies, much like Central Intelligence Agency, MI6, Mossad, Israeli Mossad, Pakistan ISI, in hopes of having a destabilized Middle East. And to have proper military training, they needed to have an operative inside these groups. And that operative was Ali Mohammed.
So you're suggesting he was something of an unconscious agent provocateur there, that he was, he himself might not have been aware that he was carrying out the CIA's wishes.
Absolutely. Now, do I have evidence of this? No. But when you look back at his history, if you do a more in-depth history, go to historycommons.com. And that's the, probably the best site I can refer you to. And it'll go into really in-depth profile about Ali Mohammed himself. Yes, I actually think that he actually was putting one off on the Central Intelligence, and not just the CIA, but the FBI as well. But I think the FBI might have been duped in that regard. I don't think so with the Central Intelligence. I think the CIA exactly knew what they were doing handling Ali Mohammed. And I just don't think that Ali Mohammed knew that they knew that much. I just think that he thought that they were just being duped themselves. But they had to have known. He had to have known also, too. Maybe his ego got in the way regarding, say, for example, when he told Hezbollah that he was a CIA agent, and that he probably didn't realize that that group could have been perpetrated by other agents as well from the Central Intelligence Agency, and that they would go back and tell about what happened with Ali Mohammed. That had to have been the case, because why would he just come right out and say it without having repercussions for the Central Agency in that regard?
I think when you say things like you don't have any evidence for a position, I think there's evidence for various positions, right? And what we're confronted with is a mystery. Like Ali Mohammed is a story that doesn't quite make sense, however you look at it. And you could say there's evidence that he was an Al-Qaeda figure through and through who played the CIA, but equally you look at the story a different way, and there's evidence that the CIA used him to achieve its nefarious goals in Eastern Europe and Eastern Africa. And I could see there being evidence of both those positions.
Right. Now, what I'm saying is that there's no direct evidence to say that that he was being manipulated by the FBI in terms of like documentation and stuff like that. But no, he's being used. And I think that the Central Intelligence Agency always knew that. And I think he wasn't just the only one. I think another person like that would be Omar Abdel Rahman himself.
Yeah. Now, just my intuition with Omar Abdel Rahman is that he seems to fit the mold of someone who is unconsciously being manipulated. Right, I don't get the sense if he goes into a private room with CIA guys and, they tell him that the agenda is to bomb the World Trade Center or something. He seems to be someone who is being used to carry out certain goals, but he's not aware of that himself.
Right. I think there was a New York Times article after the bombing had happened that the reason why he was allowed to conduct these sermons, even though at the Al-Khifa Mosque, I'm sorry, the Al-Khifa Refugee Center. I kept calling it mosque. It's the Al-Khifa Refugee Center. The reason why was because he was an informant himself. And he was an informant for the FBI for that long. And that the FBI knew about this information regarding Rahman, and they didn't care. And that the Central Intelligence say he considered the FBI hypocritical. And I should have brought this up when we was talking about Ali Mohammed, was that was one of the reasons why I think that the agent's name for the Central Intelligence was called John Anderson. And he states later on that the FBI was they actually knew about Ali Mohammed's activities inside the United States, just like they knew about Omar Abdel Rahman, because he was an informant for the FBI.
Well, maybe that sort of contradicts what I've just said. Maybe he was more conscious of his role than I perceived. Yeah.
But then again, no, I think you're right about he was unconsciously used by the Central Intelligence Agency. I think that's correct, because remember, like I brought up in the interview before, they gave Rahman his visa, and he was approved his visa not once, twice, but 4 times, and he was on a terrorist watch list, and it was CIA agents posing as consular embassy agents in that Cairo embassy office. So they knew that this guy was bad news and still gave him his U.S. visa. I think not that Rahman knew about this, but here's evidence that he's being used. That's what I believe with Rahman.
Yeah. Okay, Adam. Any further comments on Ali Mohammed?
No, I think we covered pretty much along broad ground regarding that. The problem with Ali Mohammed is this, and it goes back to your point, that we really can't put like a definitive finger, so to speak, the proverbial finger, and say this is who he is, because his whole life, basically starting from his formative late teens, so to speak, has nothing but been a question mark. And that we probably will never know about the man himself, or what he actually was, or who he's actually being used by, or which agency was actually conducting the character of Ali Mohammed. But we can probably put a pretty good piece together regarding which agencies were involved in his conducting his operations inside the United States as well as abroad, and that was the Central Intelligence Agency. And that's probably the best I could do for Ali Mohammed.
Okay, so like many issues in this series we've been doing, Ali Mohammed is a figure for me that raises far more questions than he answers. But we will proceed with the series and generating more questions. And next time we're looking at the Millennium Plot as we get right up close to 9/11 now. Okay, thank you very much, Adam, and I will see you next time.
Thank you for having me, Richard.